Woman. When male creatures indulge in their fighting propensity to kill one another, nature connives at it, because, comparatively speaking, females are needful to her purpose, while males are barely necessary. Being of an economic disposition, she does not specially care for the hungry broods who are quarrelsomely voracious, and who yet contribute very little towards the payment of nature's bill. Therefore, in the insect world, we witness the phenomenon of the females taking it upon themselves to keep down the male population to the bare limit of necessity. But because greatly relieved of their responsibility to nature, the males in the human world have had the freedom of their occupation and adventures. The definition of the human being is said to be that he is the tool-making animal. This tool-making is outside of nature's scope. In fact, with our tool-making power, we have been able to defy nature. The human male, having the most part of his energies free, developed this power and became formidable. Thus, though in the vital department of humanity, woman still occupies the throne given to her by nature, man in the mental department has created and extended his own dominion. For this great work, detachment of mind and freedom of movement were necessary. Man took advantage of his comparative freedom from the physical and emotional bondage, and marched unencumbered towards his extension of life's boundaries. In this, he has traveled through the perilous path of revolutions and ruins. Time after time, his accumulations have been swept away, and the current of progress has disappeared at its source. Though the gain has been considerable, yet the waste in comparison has been still more enormous, especially when we consider that much of the wealth, when vanished, has taken away the records with it. Through this repeated experience of disasters, man has discovered, though he has not fully utilized, the truth, that in all his creations the moral rhythm has to be maintained to save them from destruction, that a mere unlimited augmentation of power does not lead to real progress, that there must be balance of proportion, must be harmony of the structure with its foundation to indicate a real growth in truth. This ideal of stability is deeply cherished in woman's nature. She is never in love with merely going on, shooting wanton arrows of curiosity into the heart of darkness. All her forces instinctively work to bring things to some shape of fullness, for that is the law of life. In life's movement, though nothing is final, yet every step has its rhythm of completeness. Even the bud has its ideal of rounded perfection. So has the flower and also the fruit. But an unfinished building has not that ideal of wholeness in itself. Therefore, if it goes on indefinitely in its growth of dimensions, it gradually grows out of its standard of stability. The masculine creations of intellectual civilization are towers of Babel. They dare to defy their foundations, and therefore topple down over and over again. Thus, human history is growing up over layers of ruins. It is not a continuous life growth. The present war is an illustration of this. The economic and political organizations, which merely represent mechanical power, born of intellect, are apt to forget their centers of gravity in the foundational world of life. The cumulative greed of power and possession, which can have no finality of completeness in itself, which has no harmony with the ideal of moral and spiritual perfection, must at last lay a violent hand upon its own ponderousness of material. At the present stage of history, civilization is almost exclusively masculine, a civilization of power, in which woman has been thrust aside in the shade. Therefore, it has lost its balance, and it is moving by hopping from war to war. Its motive forces are the forces of destruction, and its ceremonials are carried through by an appalling number of human sacrifices. This one-sided civilization is crashing along a series of catastrophes at a tremendous speed because of its one-sidedness. And at last the time has arrived when woman must step in and impart her life rhythm to this reckless movement of power. For woman's function is the passive function of the soil, which not only helps the tree grow, but keeps its growth within limits. The tree must have life's adventure and send up and spread out its branches on all sides. But all its deeper bonds of relation are hidden and held firm in the soil, and this helps it to live. Our civilization must also have its passive element, broad and deep and stable. It must not be mere growth, but harmony of growth. It must not be all tune, but it must have its time also. This time is not a barrier. It is what the banks are to the river. They guide into permanence the current which otherwise would lose itself in the amorphousness of morass. It is rhythm, the rhythm which does not check the world's movements, but leads them into truth and beauty. Woman is endowed with the passive qualities of chastity, modesty, devotion, and power of self-sacrifice in a greater measure than man is. It is the passive quality in nature which turns its monster forces into perfect creations of beauty, taming the wild elements into the delicacy of tenderness fit for the service of life. This passive quality has given woman that large and deep placidity which is so necessary for the healing and nourishing and storing of life. If life were all spending, then it would be like a rocket, going up in a flash and coming down the next moment in ashes. Life should be like a lamp, where the potentiality of light is far greater in the quantity than what appears as the flame. It is in the depth of passiveness in woman's nature that this potentiality of life is stored. I have said elsewhere that in the woman of the Western world, a certain restlessness is noted, which cannot be the normal aspect of her nature. For women who want something special and violent in their surroundings to keep their interests active only prove that they have lost touch with their own true world. Apparently, numbers of women as well as men in the West condemn the things that are commonplace. They are always hankering after something which is out of the common, straining their powers to produce a spurious originality that merely surprises, though it may not satisfy. But such efforts are not a real sign of vitality, and they must be more injurious to women than to men, because women have the vital power more strongly in them than men have. They are the mothers of the race, and they have a real interest in the things that are around them, that are the common things of life. If they did not have that, then the race would perish. If, by constantly using outside stimulation, they form something like a mental drug habit, become addicted to a continual dram drinking of sensationalism, then they lose the natural high sensibility which they have, and with it the bloom of their womanhood, and their real power to sustain the human race with what it needs the most. A man's interest in his fellow beings becomes real when he finds in them some special gift of power or usefulness. But a woman feels interest in her fellow beings because they are living creatures, because they are human, not because of some particular purpose which they can serve, or some power which they possess, and for which she has a special admiration. And because woman has this power, she exercises such charm over our minds. Her exuberance of vital interest is so attractive that it makes her speech, her laughter, her movement, everything graceful. For the note of gracefulness is in this harmony with all our surrounding interests. Fortunately for us, our everyday world has the subtle and unobtrusive beauty of the commonplace, and we have to depend upon our own sensitive minds to realize its wonders, which are invisible because spiritual. If we can pierce through the exterior, we find that the world in its commonplace aspects is a miracle. We realize this truth intuitively through our power of love. And women, through this power, discover that the object of their love and sympathy, in spite of its ragged disguise of triviality, has infinite worth. When women have lost the power of interest in things that are common, then leisure frightens them with its emptiness. Because their natural sensibilities being deadened, there is nothing in their surroundings to occupy their attention. Therefore, they keep themselves frantically busy, not in utilizing the time, but merely in filling it up. Our everyday world is like a reed. Its true value is not in itself, but those who have the power and the serenity of attention can hear the music which the infinite plays through its very emptiness. But when women form the habit of valuing things for themselves, then they may be expected furiously to storm your mind, to decoy your soul from her love tryst of the eternal, and to make you try to smother the voice of the infinite by the unmeaning rattle of ceaseless movement. I do not mean to imply that domestic life is the only life for a woman. I mean that the human world is the woman's world, be it domestic or be it full of the other activities of life, which are human activities, and not merely abstract efforts to organize. Wherever there is something which is concretely personal and human, there is woman's world. The domestic world is the world where every individual finds his worth as an individual. Therefore, his value is not the market value, but the value of love. That is to say, the value that God in His infinite mercy has set upon all His creatures. This domestic world has been the gift of God to woman. She can extend her radiance of love beyond its boundaries on all sides, and even leave it to prove her woman's nature when the call comes to her. But this is a truth which cannot be ignored, that the moment she is born in her mother's arms, she is born in the center of her own true world, the world of human relationships. Woman should use her power to break through the surface and go to the center of things, where, in the mystery of life, dwells an eternal source of interest. Man has not this power to such an extent, but woman has it, if she does not kill it. And therefore, she loves creatures who are not lovable for their uncommon qualities. Man has to do his duty in a world of his own, where he is always creating power and wealth and organizations of different kinds. But God has sent woman to love the world, which is a world of ordinary things and events. She is not in the world of the fairy tale where the fair woman sleeps for ages till she is touched by the magic wand. In God's world, women have their magic wands everywhere, which keep their hearts awake, and these are not the golden wands of wealth, nor the iron rods of power. All our spiritual teachers have proclaimed the infinite worth of the individual. It is the rampant materialism of the present age which ruthlessly sacrifices individuals to the bloodthirsty idols of organization. When religion was materialistic, when men worshipped their gods for fear of their malevolence, or for greed of wealth and power, then the ceremonies of worship were cruel, and sacrifices were claimed without number. With the growth of man's spiritual life, our worship has become the worship of love. At the present stage of civilization, when the mutilation of individuals is not only practiced, but glorified, women are feeling ashamed of their own womanliness. For God, with His message of love, has sent them as guardians of individuals, and in this their divine vocation, individuals are more to them than army and navy and parliament, shops and factories. Here they have their service in God's own temple of reality, where love is of more value than power. But because men in their pride of power have taken to deriding things that are living and relationships that are human, a large number of women are screaming themselves hoarse to prove that they are not women, that they are true where they represent power and organization. In the present age, They feel that their pride is hurt when they are taken as mere mothers of the race, as the ministers to the vital needs of its existence, and to its deeper spiritual necessity of sympathy and love. Because men praise with pious unctuousness the idolatry of their manufactured images of abstractions, women in shame are breaking their own true God, who is waiting for his worship of self-sacrifice in love. Changes have been going on for a long time underneath the solid crust of society on which woman's world has its foundation. Of late, with the help of science, civilization has been growing increasingly masculine, so that the full reality of the individual is more and more ignored. Organization is encroaching upon the province of personal relationship, and sentiment is giving way to law. In some societies, too much dominated by masculine ideals, infanticide prevailed, which ruthlessly kept down the female element of the population as low as possible. The same thing in another form has taken place in modern civilization. In its inordinate lust for power and wealth, it has robbed woman of the most part of her world, and the home is every day being crowded out by the office. It is taking the whole world for itself, leaving hardly any room for woman. It is not merely inflicting injury, but insult upon her. But woman cannot be pushed back for good into the mere region of the decorative by man's aggressiveness of power. For she is not less necessary in civilization than man, but possibly more so. In the geological history of Earth, the periods of gigantic cataclysms have passed when the Earth had not attained that mellowness of maturity which despises all violent exhibition of force. And the civilization of competing commerce and fighting powers must also make room for that stage of perfection, whose power lies deep in beauty and beneficence. Too long has ambition been at the helm of our history, so that every right of the individual has had to be wrenched by force from the party in power, and man has had to invoke the help of evil to attain what was good for him. But such an arrangement cannot be lasting, but must give way time after time, for the seeds of violence lie in wait in its cracks and crevices, and roots of disruption spread in the dark and cause breakdown when it is least expected. Therefore, although in the present stage of history man is asserting his masculine supremacy and building his civilization with stone blocks, ignoring the living principle of growth, he cannot altogether crush woman's nature into dust or into his dead building materials. Woman's home may have been shattered, but woman is not, and cannot, herself be killed. It is not that woman is merely seeking her freedom of livelihood, struggling against man's monopoly of business, but against man's monopoly of civilization, where he is breaking her heart every day and desolating her life. She must restore the lost social balance by putting the full weight of the woman into the creation of the human world. The monster car of organization is creaking and growling along life's highway, spreading misery and mutilation, for it must have speed before everything else in the world. Therefore, woman must come into the bruised and maimed world of the individual. She must claim each one of them as her own, the useless and the insignificant. She must protect with her care all the beautiful flowers of sentiment from the scorching laughter of the science of proficiency. The growing impurities, born of the deprivation of its normal conditions imposed upon life by the organized power of greed, she must sweep away. The time has come when woman's responsibility has become greater than ever before, when her field of work has far transcended the domestic sphere of life. The world with its insulted individuals has sent its appeal to her. These individuals must find their true value, raise their heads once again in the sun, and renew their faith in God's love through her love. Men have seen the absurdity of today's civilization, which is based upon nationalism. That is to say, on economics and politics and its consequent militarism. Men have been losing their freedom and their humanity in order to fit themselves for vast mechanical organizations. So the next civilization, it is hoped, will be based not merely upon economical and political competition and exploitation, but upon worldwide social cooperation, upon spiritual ideals of reciprocity, and not upon economic ideals of efficiency. And then women will have their true place. Because men have been building up vast and monstrous organizations, they have got into the habit of thinking that this turning out power has something of the nature of perfection in itself. The habit is ingrained in them, and it is difficult for them to see where truth is missing in their present ideal of progress. But woman can bring fresh mind and all her power of sympathy to this new task of building up a spiritual civilization, if she will be conscious of her responsibilities. Of course, she can be frivolous or very narrow in her outlook, and then she will miss her great mission. And just because woman has been insulated, has been living in a sort of obscurity behind man, I think she will have her compensation in the civilization which is waiting to come. And these human beings who have been boastful of their power and aggressive in their exploitation, who have lost faith in the real meaning of the teaching of their master, that the meek shall inherit the earth, will be defeated in the next generation of life. It is the same thing that happened in the ancient days, in the prehistoric times, to those great monsters like the mammoths and dinosaurs. They have lost their inheritance of the earth. They had the gigantic muscles for mighty efforts, but they had to give up to creatures who were much feebler in their muscles and who took up much less space with their dimensions. And in the future civilization also, the women, the feebler creatures, feebler at least in their outer aspects, who are less muscular and who have been behindhand, always left under the shadow of those huge creatures, the men. They will have their place, and those bigger creatures will have to give way. The end.